This is the second class in our first course, Created on Purpose or Evolved by Chance. Is there scientific, historical, and logical reasons to believe that the Bible is true and God is the creator of the universe? In this class, we'll take a close look at the evidence for a worldwide flood as recorded in the historical record of the Bible. Let's get started. Now, do we have any historical records that tell us that there was actually a worldwide flood? I mean, that's a gigantic event. We're going to be talking about things like September 11th for a very long time. It was a horrible tragedy. Things like Pearl Harbor in our history or World War II. But what about a historical flood? A flood that covered the earth and destroyed everything. Wouldn't Noah pass that story on to his kids and then his kids to their kids and on and on and on? And people would constantly be asking, where did we come from? What happened? Where did we originate, Mom and Dad? And the story is always going to be told and retold and told of a worldwide flood. And as people spread out all over the earth, they're going to carry with them that story of a worldwide flood and where they came from. It's something inherent to human nature is to know where we came from.
Well, that certainly is a lovely hypothesis you have there, Kevin. Let's see if it holds water.
Turns out there are over 400 stories throughout the world in different cultures around the world talking about a worldwide flood.
It also turns out that not a single one of them matches the Hebrew flood myth.
The Hawaiian legend says long after the death of Kunihuhana, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The waters came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. The Hulapai Indians of northwestern Arizona have a flood story also. It's an oral story, and it corresponds to petroglyphs, one depicting a vessel carrying 8 people, including a younger brother chief, across the floodwaters inscribed on the flanks of Spirit Mountain in the areas of Davis Dam, California, near the Colorado River. It rained for 45 days, according to the legend, and the whole earth was flooded. All the people were destroyed except for one old man atop Spirit Mountain. Many days passed, and a dove brought him instructions from the Creator to drive a ram's horn into the earth. The old man obeyed, and the waters were drained. He sent the dove forth, and when it returned with fresh grass in its beak, he rejoiced, for the land had become dry. One ancient Chinese classic called The High King tells the story of Fu Hai, whom the Chinese consider to be the father of their civilization. This story records that Fu Hai, his wife, 3 sons, and 3 daughters escaped the Great Flood. He and his family were the only people alive on earth, and after the Great Flood, they repopulated the world. The Toltec Indians of ancient Mexico said the first world lasted 1,716 years and was destroyed by a great flood that covered the highest mountains. Only one family survived.
Now let's look at the people from Cameroon in Central Africa and what they had to say about their flood story. A girl was grinding flour. A goat came to lick it. She first drove it away, but when it came back, she allowed it to lick as much as it could. In return for the kindness, the goat told her there'd be a flood that day and advised her and her brother to run elsewhere immediately. They escaped with a few belongings and looked back at the water covering their village. After the flood, they lived on for many years, unable to find mates. The goat reappeared and said they could marry themselves, but they'd have to put a hoe handle in a clay pot with a broken bottom on their roof to signify that they're relatives. You see, the only thing about all these flood stories that they have in common, that they all have in common, is there are water. It's not true that the further you get away, the more further from the original story they are. You have stories that are nothing at all like the biblical story, not far away at all. One of my favorites is the African pygmy flood story. Chameleon heard a strange noise like running water in a tree, but at that time there was no water in the world. He cut open the trunk, and water came out in a great flood that spread all over the earth. The first human couple emerged with the water. There's no way that is anything like the Hebrew flood myth, and there's no way they originated from the same story.
Now, the Bible dates put the flood at 1,656 years after creation. The Toltec legend is only 60 years off after 4,000 years. The Gilgamesh epic, the saga of an ancient Babylonian king Gilgamesh, includes an expanded flood story on Tablet 11, similar to the flood story in Genesis 6 through 9. The best-known copy of the epic was found at Nineveh on a series of baked clay tablets. This is what it looks like. It looks very difficult to read. Got to get out your magnifying glass there.
Scholars agree that the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the Bible, and that the authors of Genesis just changed some of the details in the story to make it more fit with what they wanted it to say.
Some skeptics have said, hey, these cultures all have flood stories because there's floods all the time, and that's why there are different flood stories. It doesn't mean there was a worldwide flood. But the problem with this excuse or this idea is that the stories have a lot of similarities. For example, in 88% of the time, there's a favored family. 66% of the time, they're forewarned about the flood. 66% of the time, the flood is due to humanity's wickedness. 95% of the time, the catastrophe is only a flood. 95% of the time, it's a global flood. 70% of the time, it's due to survival on a boat. Survival is due to a boat. 67% of the time, animals are saved. 73% of the time, animals play some part. 57% of the time, survivors land on a mountain. 82% of the time, the geography is local. 35% of the time, birds are sent out. 7% of the time, a rainbow is mentioned. And 13% of the time, the survivors offer a sacrifice. 9% of the time, specifically 8 persons are saved.
And exactly 0% of the time are all the details the same, or even really close to the Hebrew flood myth.
If you put them all back together, it goes like this. Once there was a worldwide flood sent by God to judge the wickedness of man, but there was one righteous family which was forewarned of the coming flood. They built a boat on which they survived the flood, along with the animals. As the flood ended, their boat landed on a high mountain from which they descended and repopulated the whole earth. Wow, that sounds very, very similar to the account recorded in the Bible.
Actually, if you put them all together, you'd have hundreds of different gods, and nothing like we see in the story of Genesis. He goes on and on for a while about the Sumerian kings list. I'm not really that interested in that. It relies on an awful lot of assumptions. The assumption that those people actually all existed and that they lived as long as he thinks they did. But next he goes into the fossil record, and it gets a little more interesting.
Okay, evidence number 2. Did you know that fossils can form quickly? Fossils give evidence of a worldwide flood. Now, it's a common misunderstanding that fossils take a long time to form, and therefore evidence for an old Earth. But the reality is, fossils don't take a long time to form.
Oh my God, he's stuck! The truth is, it takes an awful long time for some things to fossilize. Other things fossilize pretty quickly, but nothing's really even considered a fossil until it's at least about 10,000 years old.
Watch this quick clip on how fossils form. Now keep in mind, this is not made by a Christian. This is made by somebody just explaining how fossils work. They are a secularist, but I thought this video did a good job of explaining it.
Today's lesson is on fossilization. I'm your teacher, Dr. Dino. Fossils are the remains of animals, like dinosaurs, that lived long ago and have been preserved in stone. Let's take a look at how fossilization works. First, a dinosaur would have to die. Aha! That's better. Now we can continue. The best places for that to occur would be near swamps or rivers, so that sediment, particles of sand or mud, could quickly cover the body. When covered up, the remains are protected from scavengers and decay. Over time, the layers of sediment accumulate. Mineral-rich groundwater enters spaces of certain parts of the animal's remains, such as the bones, shells, or plates. When the minerals are left behind, the organic remains are slowly replaced by inorganic rock. Over time, the fossils may become exposed as sediment is worn away. And that's when paleontologists discover the fossils and carefully remove them from the ground. Fossils can be found all over the world and give scientists insight as to what prehistoric life may have been like. But you can experience fossils too. Many natural history museums have fossil exhibits that you can visit. Oh look, it's my great-aunt Mildred. Well, that concludes our episode on fossilization. Tune in next time for my famous long neck pie recipe.
I wonder where he got the idea that that was a secular clip or non-Christian, like he said. I mean, the fact is that most Christians accept the fact that the earth is billions of years old and that fossils have been around and been made for the last hundreds of millions of years.
So to form a fossil, you need what? Okay, if you were out in the desert and you accidentally hit a coyote on the road and it wandered off and then died in the sand, God forbid, poor coyote, it dies, would it form a fossil? No, actually it wouldn't. It would decompose and scavengers would eat it and it would be destroyed. What if you got out of the car and you gave the coyote a proper burial? You dug up, buried it, but would it form a fossil? No, actually it still wouldn't, because there's not water involved. And so it takes very special conditions to form a fossil. You know, we used to have 300 million buffalo in America, but we have almost no buffalo fossils. Why? Because the circumstances that are necessary in order to create fossils don't exist. But what you need is rapid burial and water and mud. What event provided exactly what was necessary to create tons and tons of fossils? Well, that'd be the worldwide flood.
None of those conditions require any worldwide flood. We can find them locally all over the world, and we don't see what we would expect to see with a worldwide flood is these same type of fossils everywhere around the world. We only see them in certain areas where the conditions were right.
Watch what happens to this dead lizard if it's left out. This is a time-lapse video showing how quickly an animal will be scavenged if it's just left out and not buried.
We also see lots of fossils that have obvious tooth marks and evidence they were preyed upon after they died.
This is a petrified cowboy leg that was found in a dry creek bed near the West Texas town of Iran about 1980 by Mr. Jerry Stone. He was an employee of the Corvette Oil Company. Let's think about how this guy's leg became a fossil. You know, maybe what happened to him here is he was running. He had dropped his gun or ran out of bullets. He was being chased by a mountain lion. He saw what looked like a dry creek bed, and he went to run across the dry creek bed, but he didn't know it was mud, and his leg sunk into the dry creek bed. He couldn't get his leg out. He tried and tried, couldn't get his leg out. The mountain lion grabbed a hold of him and ate him. And then over time, because the mountain lion couldn't get to his leg was stuck in the mud, and over time, as the wet seasons came, water would sift through there. Now, remember that a bone is like a cast in the sense that if you were to make something out of plastic or whatever, all the things around your house, what they'll do is they'll pour hot plastic, melted plastic into a cast, and that cast then forms the plastic, and that's what happens. So the way a fossil forms is the bone acts as a cast. As the minerals hit the bone decomposes, but the minerals turn into, they accumulate and they form a rock that's in the shape of the bone. So no longer have any bone, you only have rock left that's in the shape of the bone, showing what used to be there.
This one is so bad, I'm really surprised he even decided to use it. The bone shows absolutely no evidence of being fossilized. The boot shows no evidence of being fossilized. In fact, the leather is still supple. Carl Baugh, who runs the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas, removed it from his museum and removed it all but a small paragraph from his website, just because it's one of the worst creationist arguments we've ever seen.
This right here is an ichthyosaur, and what's amazing about it, if you look closely, it is actually in the process of giving birth. Now, birth happens really quickly, so this animal, in order to be fossilized giving birth, had to be buried instantaneously. So as it's giving birth, because remember, after it's buried, it can't give birth, it's done. And if it gives birth before it happens, you wouldn't see the baby coming out of the back of the ichthyosaur here. So it's instantaneous mud covering it, right, and just taking kind of a photograph of that moment. And boom, that happened, and it's covered, and everything is done.
A much better explanation is that the mother actually died giving birth. That happens with animals today. We see it happen all the time. The mother didn't have to be covered quickly while giving birth. She could have died giving birth and covered slowly with sediment, just like other fossils would have been.
Now, this is all over the earth we find fossils like this of animals trapped in the midst of running or eating or whatever. They're like photographs of a moment in time. And what they really are photographs of the worldwide flood in process. Right here.
Wait a minute there. I want to talk to you about this fish too before we go. Creationists just love to bring up these fish that they say were supposedly caught by the flood while eating. They weren't caught by any flood while eating. He died while trying to eat a fish that was obviously too big to go down his throat. So he died and was covered slowly. All right, go now.
Here's a petrified bowler's hat.
No, it isn't. It's coated with minerals.
This was found in New Zealand. Now, we know this is not millions of years old, this bowler's hat, so we know that fossils can form quickly. They don't need to form over millions of years. This is a petrified pickle.
Yeah, sure it is. And who determined that?
This is a petrified flour bag. And again, petrification doesn't take millions of years. It just takes the right circumstances.
He doesn't understand the difference between something that's been coated with minerals or something that the molecules have been replaced.
These are petrified eggs. They've even found many strata with hundreds and thousands of petrified squid. Now, squid are soft-bodied. Remember, if a jellyfish washes up on the beach, it decomposes very rapidly. It has no bones, so the bones don't last any time at all. So the question is, how do you petrify jellyfish or squid which have no bones? Well, you're talking about instantaneous burial.
And that might be the case, but there's certainly no worldwide flood needed. Well, we still got a little ways to go yet on Kevin Conover's online course on creationism. In fact, we still got a little ways yet to go on this so-called evidence for the flood, but we're going to stop there for right now. I'll pick it up next time with, you guessed it, clams on Mount Everest.